Ashley Thompson.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The United Nations has warned Sudan's conflict risks morphing into a broader crisis as impoverished neighbors welcome an influx of refugees. Reuters correspondent David Doyle has more.
Aisha Ibrahim Dawood is among more than 100,000 people, according to the UN on Tuesday, who have fled Sudan's war across borders into its neighbors.
We would withstand anything. We withstood the sounds of gunfire. We can withstand the heat. This is the simplest thing.
Sudan's war has now raged for more than 3 weeks. Hundreds have been killed and a humanitarian crisis triggered. Despite a ceasefire deal, gunfire and explosions echoed across the capital on Tuesday.
Reuters correspondent David Doyle. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration is asking for troops to be sent to the U.S.-Mexico border ahead of an expected migrant surge later this month, AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Vermont is now the first state to
pandemic-era restrictions that let the U.S. turn away tens of thousands of migrants from the border will expire next week. Officials say the administration wants to send 1,500 troops there to focus on administrative tasks while Customs and Border Protection agents shift to the field. The administration's already made major changes to tighten the border ahead of time. Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas said last week illegal immigrants should know they cannot use the end of the restrictions to flood in.
Our border is not open and will not be open after May 11th.
Sagar Magani at the White House.
Find more on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. A multi-continental crackdown has halted a major dark web drugs marketplace, with international police arresting 288 suspects and recovering more than 50 million euros in cash and virtual currency, Europol said Tuesday. The operation by U.S., British, Brazilian, and European law enforcement also netted almost a ton of drugs and 117 firearms, Europe's policing agency said. The largest number of arrests were in the United States, with 153, Britain 55, Germany 52, and the Netherlands 10. One suspect was also arrested in Brazil. The northeastern U.S. state of Vermont now allows non-residents to use its assisted suicide law, AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
Vermont is now the first state to change its medically assisted suicide law to allow terminally ill people from out of state to take advantage of it to end their lives. Before Vermont removed its residency requirement Tuesday, it had reached a settlement with a Connecticut woman who has terminal cancer to allow her to take advantage of its law, provided she complies with other aspects of it. Vermont is one of 10 states that allow medically assisted suicide. Critics of such laws say without the residency requirements, states risk becoming assisted suicide destinations. I'm Norman Hall.
Thousands of film, television writers headed to picket lines on Tuesday for their work stoppage, and the first one in 15 years, sending Hollywood into turmoil and disrupting TV production as the industry wrestles with a shift to streaming. The Writers Guild of America says its leadership unanimously supported a strike after failing to reach an agreement for higher pay from studios such as Disney and Netflix. The WGA represents roughly 11,500 writers and said, quote, the company's behavior has created a gig economy inside a union workforce. Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot has died at the age of 84 at a hospital in Toronto, according to his representative. A cause of death was not given, AP correspondent Margie Zaraletta reports.
If you could read my mind.
Gordon Lightfoot's early jobs were at a bank, delivering linens, and as a square dancer on TV. He was living in a condemned building when he met fellow musician Ronnie Hawkins and became part of the folk scene in Toronto.
Carefree Highway.
Lightfoot's hits include Carefree Highway, Sundown, If You Could Read My Mind, and The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Lightfoot once said he took situations and wrote poems about them.
The legend lives on.
Lightfoot had planned to tour even this year. He had played more than 1,500 concerts. I'm Archie Zaraletta.
And I'm Joe Ramsey. VOA.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The United Nations Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, says he is in Sudan to reaffirm the commitment of the UN to support Sudanese people. Michael Atit reports from Port Sudan.
Griffith says he will be making efforts in coming days to meet representatives of both the armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces to ensure that an immediate ceasefire is upheld and allow the smooth movement of humanitarian operations. The two sides are locked in a power struggle. Not everyone is welcoming the UN presence in Sudan. Protesters demanded that head of the UN mission in Sudan, Volker Perthes, leave the country immediately. Michael Atit for VOA News, Port Sudan.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday he is highly skeptical of any allegations made by Russia after Moscow claimed Kyiv had launched a drone attack on the Kremlin.
I've seen the reports. I can't in any way validate them. We simply don't know. Second, I would take anything coming out of the Kremlin with a very large shaker of salt.
Russia said Wednesday that 2 drones had targeted President Vladimir Putin's Kremlin residence overnight, describing it as a Ukrainian terrorist attack ahead of the important May 9th holiday when Russians celebrate victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Kyiv denied the claim, suggesting the attack was staged by Moscow. The European Union moved ahead on Wednesday with plans to buy urgently needed artillery shells for Ukraine, as well as ramping up the bloc's ability to produce munitions. Ambassadors from EU countries agreed details of a €1 billion scheme to jointly buy ammunition for Ukraine after weeks of wrangling that had frustrated leaders in Kyiv. This is VOA News. Serbian officials said a boy gunned down fellow classmates in a Belgrade school on Wednesday morning in a pre-planned attack, shooting dead at least 8 plus a security guard, Reuters correspondent Edward Barron reports.
The mass shooting at a school in Belgrade, Serbia, Wednesday morning was carefully pre-planned by the suspect, a 13-year-old boy, according to authorities. Several people are dead and others wounded. Using 2 handguns that belonged to his father, the boy first fired at a security guard and 3 girls in the hallway. He then entered a history class and shot the teacher and classmates, police said, adding that he also had 2 Molotov cocktails. Police said a 7th grade student had been arrested after confessing to the shooting.
Reuters correspondent Edward Barron. At least 127 people have died as floods and landslides engulfed several parts of Rwanda after torrential rains, destroying homes and cutting off roads, the presidency said Wednesday. Images posted online by the state broadcaster showed rivers of mud sweeping through the streets as residents scrambled for safety. Quote, rescue interventions are ongoing in the most affected districts in order to secure endangered citizens, the office of President Paul Kagame said in a statement. The International Monetary Fund says inflation will dampen growth across the Mideast this year. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Economies across the Middle East and Central Asia will likely slow this year as persistently high inflation and rising interest rates bite into their post-pandemic gains. The IMF's regional economic outlook blames in part rising energy costs as well as elevated food prices for the estimated slower growth. The report says that while oil-dependent economies of the Gulf Arab states and others in the region have reaped the benefits of elevated crude prices, other countries, such as Pakistan, have seen growth collapse as economic woes worsened. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Myanmar's junta pardoned more than 2,000 political prisoners to mark a Buddhist holiday on Wednesday, triggering tearful reunions outside jails, but also demands that many others behind bars be released. The military has arrested thousands of protesters and activists since its February 2021 revolt that ended Myanmar's brief democratic experiment and plunged the country into turmoil. Protesters and journalists were among the 2,153 people freed, reporters said, a tiny fraction of those targeted in the military's brutal and sweeping crackdown on dissent. Follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. The leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, and 3 other members of the far-right extremist group in the United States were convicted of seditious conspiracy Thursday for their roles in the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of 2021. AP's Ed Donahue has the story.
Seditious conspiracy is a difficult charge to prove.
Specifically, conspiring to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power.
Tarrio wasn't in Washington on the day of the riot, but prosecutors say he directed the Proud Boys attack. These convictions will likely embolden Attorney General Merrick Garland and the Justice Department moving forward.
After 3 trials, we have secured the convictions of leaders of both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers for seditious conspiracy.
The seditious conspiracy charge carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years. In court, a lawyer for Tarrio tried to push the blame onto Donald Trump, arguing the former president incited the pro-Trump mob's attack when he urged the crowd near the White House to fight like hell. Ed Donahue, Washington.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pledged to destroy Russian evil, to use his phrase, before handing out watches to wounded Ukrainian soldiers at a Dutch military base on Thursday as part of his surprise visit to the Netherlands. Zelensky had earlier met the king and prime minister and called for a new international tribunal to be set up in The Hague to try Russia's leadership for the crime of aggression over its invasion of Ukraine.
To prevent the aggression against our country and also new wars. There are potential aggressors in the world, and the world must see justice to see peace fully secured.
During his visit to a military base, the president met a handful of soldiers who are undergoing rehabilitation treatment in the Netherlands. From Washington, this is VOA News. The U.S. Treasury's June 1st estimated deadline for Congress to raise the debt ceiling or risk default has ratcheted up the heat on Washington's lawmakers to avert an economic crisis. Reuters' Chris Dignam has more.
Since the U.S. Treasury estimated the government has until June 1st before it hits the country's debt limit, sooner than expected, the risk of a U.S. default has turned up the heat on Washington's lawmakers to avert an economic crisis.
The United States is getting perilously close to a really dangerous situation.
Reuters White House correspondent Trevor Honeycutt says that with less than a month before that deadline, time is quickly running out to reach a deal. The last long standoff on the debt limit was when Republicans controlled the House during Barack Obama's administration. That ultimately led to a historic downgrade of the nation's credit rating, which raised borrowing costs and hammered markets.
Reuters' Chris Dignam reporting Zambia's opposition has criticized an agreement with Kenya to allow Kenyan farming of maize in Zambia to help meet its food needs amid a record drought. The National Democratic Congress says Zambian farmers should be given priority for farming Zambian land. VOA's Kathy Short has more.
The Horn of Africa's record drought has made maize a staple food in Africa and even more sought-after grain. In Zambia, one of sub-Saharan Africa's top maize suppliers, police say that demand has fueled smuggling to neighbors like the Democratic Republic of Congo, causing shortages at home. Despite the supply concerns at home, Zambia in March signed a controversial deal with Nairobi to allow Kenyan farmers to grow maize in Zambia for export to Kenya. Kenya's High Court in April temporarily suspended the deal after the Kenyan Farmers' Party argued it is unconstitutional. Another hearing is scheduled for later in May. Kathy Short for VOA News, Lusaka, Zambia.
People lined up in Port Sudan on Thursday in a bid to flee the fighting that's taking place across Sudan. An Australian Air Force plane sat on the tarmac waiting to take the evacuees to Australia as queues of people waited to have their documents checked. U.S. intelligence officials warned on Thursday that the conflict in Sudan is likely to drag on as the Sudanese army tried to dislodge the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces from its positions near central Khartoum installations. In fierce fighting, each side appears to be battling for control of territory in the capital ahead of any possible negotiations, though the leaders of both factions have shown little public willingness to hold talks so far. More on this at our website, voanews.com. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. Crowds of people are camping out in the Red Sea city of Port Sudan after having fled fighting between Sudan's army and paramilitary forces. Refugees say getting out of the bottleneck there comes as yet another challenge. Reuters' Angela Johnston has more.
Under makeshift tents in sweltering heat, many of these people in Port Sudan remain in limbo. They escaped fighting between Sudan's army and paramilitary forces, but with refugees arriving every day from Khartoum, as well as Syria and Yemen, people are finding it hard to get a ticket out of the Red Sea city. UN and foreign missions are setting up bases, and Red Sea neighbor Saudi Arabia has evacuated almost 8,000 people. But demand to get out is outpacing supply, refugees say, and the price for a room is skyrocketing. Because of politics, all of the Sudanese people have been displaced, this man says. We're here, but we'd be better dead in Khartoum.
Reuters' Angela Johnston reporting. Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of Russia's Wagner Group mercenary force, said in a sudden announcement Friday his forces would leave the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, which they've been trying to capture since last summer.
Мы собирались к 9 мая 23 года овладеть населенным пунктом Бахмут.
Prigozhin said they would pull back on May 10th, ending their involvement in the longest and bloodiest battle of the Ukraine conflict. Because of heavy losses and inadequate ammunition supplies, he asked defense chiefs to insert regular army troops in their place. Philippine authorities say they rescued more than 1,000 human trafficking victims from across Asia during a raid Thursday and Friday. More on that at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. The World Health Organization has ended the global emergency status for COVID-19 on Friday, saying countries should now manage the virus like other infectious diseases. Reuters' Freddie Joyner has more.
It's therefore with great hope that I declare COVID-19 over as a global health emergency.
The Director General of the World Health Organization on Friday announced he was ending the emergency he declared for COVID-19 more than 3 years ago, marking a major milestone in the pandemic that has killed more than 6.9 million people, disrupted the global economy, and ravaged communities.
COVID has changed our world.
The move comes a day after the WHO Emergency Committee recommended the UN agency declare an end to the coronavirus crisis. But the WHO chief warned that the end of the emergency did not mean COVID was over as a global health threat.
The worst thing any country could do now is to use this news as a reason to let down its guard. If we all go back to how things were before COVID-19, we will have failed to learn our lessons.
That's Reuters' Freddie Joyner reporting. St. Louis's first black prosecutor says she will resign as Republican leaders call for her immediate ouster. AP correspondent Jennifer King.
St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner says she will step aside on June 1st. The Democrat tweeted the news to city constituents Thursday, citing efforts by the state attorney general and Missouri's legislature to remove her and appoint a special prosecutor. Republicans, including Attorney General Andrew Bailey, say too many cases have gone unpunished. Supporters say Gardner championed police reforms but has been embattled since taking office. She spoke with the AP back in January of 2020.
This is a night ride. This is sending a message. If you are a progressive-minded prosecutor and you want to make the criminal justice fair for everyone, that we are going to make an example out of you.
Judge Michael Noble ripped Gardner in court in April after an overburdened prosecutor twice failed to show up to court in a shooting case.
The circuit attorney's office appears to be a rudderless ship of chaos.
Republican Congresswoman Ann Wagner applauded her resignation, tweeting St. Louis will be better off without her. I'm Jennifer King.
Serbian police said Friday they'd arrested a suspect in the second mass shooting case in 2 days in Serbia. The man arrested Friday is a suspect in Thursday's shootings that ended with the death of 8 people and the wounding of 14 in a village near Belgrade. Thursday's shooting came a day after a 13-year-old boy opened fire in a school in Belgrade, killing 9 people and wounding 7. The arrest came after hundreds of police officers searched all night for the gunman who shot randomly in 3 separate villages. You can find more on that and all the stories we're covering at our website, voanews.com. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.